Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jesse Freeston, and this is our continuing coverage of Latin America. I'm joined today by Forrest Hylton. Forrest is the author of Evil Hour in Colombia. Thank you for joining us, Forrest.
Good to be here, Jesse.
Now, of late, most attention in terms of Latin America has been on the Honduran crisis, and the Real News will continue covering that. But in the background, we've seen some very, very serious developments in South America as well. And Forrest is here to talk about some recent developments in Colombia. So Forrest, maybe you could start by just giving us an update of what's going on in Colombia right now.
Well, regional tensions have escalated very dramatically between Colombia and its neighbors, Ecuador and Venezuela, as a result of the U.S. announcement that it's going to be moving into 3 Colombian bases that already exist. And there's negotiations for possibly a couple more. The Colombian government apparently of President Álvaro Uribe would be willing to have up to 7 U.S. military bases in Colombia. And this is all taking place because the lease on the Manta base in Ecuador is up this year, 2009, and the United States has essentially been asked to leave.
Hemos dicho claramente que en el 2009 no se renovará el convenio porque creemos que soberanía es no tener soldados extranjeros en el suelo patrio. En ese sentido no hay nada pendiente tampoco en ese tema. Hemos abierto tan solo una posibilidad de extender el tratado. Extenderíamos el tratado siempre y cuando Estados Unidos nos permita poner una base ecuatoriana en Miami.
Today, the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, said that the next time Colombia attacks Ecuadorian territory, there will be a military response by Ecuador. The Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, has said that he will move 2 tank battalions and both artillery and infantry to the border with Colombia in order to protect against any possible incursions.
Ahora los yanquis quieren montar en Colombia 4 bases militares más. Claro, usan un eufemismo, ¿no? Que no son bases yanquis, sino bases colombianas, pero que ellos pueden venir van a estar ahí permanentemente. Lo cual nos va a obligar, así lo digo, y el canciller ya le he dado instrucciones a revisar las relaciones con Colombia.
It's pretty clear that they're going to be using this base to conduct surveillance throughout the region, although Colombia has been quick to reassure its neighbors that these planes will be restricted to Colombian airspace and they won't be able to carry out missions that go beyond Colombian airspace. But the fact is, what is to stop U.S. military planes from simply flying to wherever they can reach and flying right back in conducting intelligence missions? This is something that already took place when Colombia bombed Ecuadorian territory on March 1st of 2008. It was receiving, as far as I know, communications and intelligence support from the U.S. military, both at Tres Esquinas military base in Colombia and the Manta base in Ecuador. So Ambassador Brownfield, the U.S. ambassador to Colombia, who was previously the U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, is not being disingenuous when he says that this is in fact a continuation of what we have already been doing, and this is about cooperation rather than the U.S. sort of invading Colombia or sending ground forces in to meddle in its conflict.
And Colombian officials have said that this is in no way different from the sort of cooperation that we've seen between Venezuela and Russia, which has involved naval exercises with Russian ships in the Caribbean. Is that a fair comparison?
I think to answer that question, it's best to pose another question. If Hugo Chavez allowed the Russians, say, or the Chinese to build military bases alongside or occupy existing Venezuelan bases on Venezuelan territory, I think we can imagine what the U.S. government and media response would be to that. It's pretty clear that Venezuela cannot prevent the United States from installing these military bases in Colombia, but it's equally clear that Venezuela and Ecuador consider this a threat to their national sovereignty, and on that count, they're likely to have support from all of the rest of the countries in the South American region, united in UNASUR, as well as the Organization of American States.
And now also we're seeing here the United States deepening ties with a Colombian military that has a very long history of human rights abuses. Could you talk a little bit about some of the more troubling instances of this that you've taken note of?
So in the 1990s, Colombia was far and away the hemisphere's worst violator of human rights, and that trend began to change once this kind of state terror was subcontracted, decentralized, and privatized. And that was done through the rise of the paramilitaries. And the paramilitaries committed the vast majority of human rights abuses in Colombia until their process of negotiation with and legitimation under President Álvaro Uribe. So under President Uribe, the amount of military atrocities committed has gone up, particularly as the paramilitary violence has gone down. So there's always been a kind of equation between the amount of state terror and the amount of terror that's done by private armed groups connected to the political and business establishment. And now we've seen with the scandals in Colombia of all these young men who were disappeared and dressed up as guerrillas because there was an incentive to play with the statistics in order to make it look like they were killing FARC guerrillas when in fact they were actually killing civilians. This sort of thing is an institutionalized practice in the Colombian armed forces, and it dates back to the late 70s or early 1980s at the very latest.
Certainly the U.S. cannot plead ignorance to this institutionalized practice that's been known as false positives, which is a bit of a euphemism for killing innocent people. The National Security Archive in early January released information that both the State Department and the CIA have been passing memos dating back as far as 1994 talking about this false positives practice and the practice of promoting people based on their body counts inside the Colombian military. How should people look at the United States increasing their ties with a military that they've known and have been talking about openly being active in some of these horrific human rights abuses?
President Uribe appeared in a Defense Intelligence Agency memo of 1991 that's also available in the National Security Archive, and I think he was listed as something like agent number 82, I forget the exact number. In any case, they discussed him as part of Pablo Escobar's retinue of politicians who essentially transacted kind of business that narco-traffickers wanted done in official political spheres. And Uribe's regime has been surrounded by sort of an ever-increasing wave of scandals, many of them connected to human rights violations and crimes against humanity. And yet the United States has continued to support him as our closest ally in the hemisphere.
The relationship between the United States and Colombia has been extremely strong. We've had great cooperation on a whole range of issues, and President Uribe's administration, I think, has, under very difficult circumstances, performed admirably on a whole range of fronts.
So that Colombia's increasing violations of human rights in its pursuit of counterinsurgency doesn't seem to have any impact on the flow or volume of U.S. aid to Colombia.